everyone, today we are going to study SamDoesArts, an absolute art god in my opinion. He recently uploaded a new video on how to color your art, and he calls it beginner friendly. Now I wanted to test how, as someone who isn't I wouldn't call myself pro at digital painting. I think I'm okay at digital painting at best, but I can still improve quite a lot. And I wanted to see if this tutorial would help me or wouldn't at all. And I wanted to share this process with you guys to give you a realistic kind of idea of, is it easy to follow or is it not? And I wanted to break down why he does so good and what makes it so good. So while I'm doing the sketch, I'm going to just talk about his process. First of all is to get a reference, and I did that too. But the problem is that not just any reference works as if you're a beginner. He picks out one that is relatively easy to follow for these reasons, is that in his reference, it's basically one subject, a very simple background, and the subject is in relatively harsh to mid sunlight. So what that does is his subject has a lot of contrast in shadows. And that's something you don't or won't have with if you have references where your subject is inside, for example, where all your shadows are diffused or soft shadows. So that makes it really hard for beginners to understand what is happening. What are these diffused shadows? It's not clear to read, because he will start talking about soft edges and hard edges and stuff like that. And it's only applicable if your subject is in that type of situation. In this case, sunlight, which is actually a very good situation to paint in. Although if your subject is in a studio, that could kind of work too, as long as there's enough contrast in shadow. Not too much, but just enough so you have that difference between soft and hard shadows. Another thing about his reference is the colors. Now there are two main colors that really pop out, especially to me, but they are complementary colors. And in my opinion, the strongest complementary colors to ever exist is like orange and blue for warm and cold. Warm and cold contrast is used literally everywhere, and not just in art pieces but also in movies, to really create that dynamic and balance. That's something as well that's in his reference that I try to find with mine. So here I'm trying to get my sketch going as well, and try to mess around, use the liquify tool, all his type of tips. And I wanted to keep it simple. That's another thing that Sam does really, really well, is keeping his sketches extremely simple. In just a few lines, he can show this is what I've drawn. And once you get to that point, I feel like you've got it down. Because if you need so many lines, or you need 100, 200 lines, or even more, or just have too many lines, right, to tell that this is my drawing, this is what I'm trying to draw, then it might not be a good drawing. Your base is extremely important for this. Now once we get into the coloring process, of course I got my reference open. I followed exact step-by-step thing, is getting in the base color, right, the base color of the skin. So trying to find the base color is basically somewhere in between where the brightest spots are on the skin and where the darkest or the shadow parts are on the skin. That's where you kind of can find the base color, right? Also in my, I think, previous videos where I colored, you also could see like I picked a relatively base color is kind of like orangey, more towards the red side, because we have blood running through our veins and stuff like that. So that's why. This is going to be a relatively long video, but feel free to skip to any part that you desire, if it's from the beginning sketch part or if it's the coloring that you need to or you want to see, or the shadow blocking or the rendering, doesn't matter. I'll put timestamps down and you guys can go to those parts that are relevant to you. So here I'm trying to figure out what is the base color for the hair, like what is all of this, and also brushes. He uses a minimal amount of brushes, and I'm using also just a round brush. For most of the process, it's actually just a round brush, but you also have the airbrush to soften. And I don't think I used it a little bit, the airbrush, for certain parts, and the smudge tool, and I think that's kind of it. But for the most part, he just uses the default round brush, right? Because yes, it's true, it's not the brush, it's the artist. So if you can master the round brush, I think it can be pretty nice to paint with as well, and you don't need 200 plus brushes. So here, this is the process where I'm going to start shadow blocking, and I tried to like learn where is this on the HSB slider, the hue, saturation, and brightness slider. But as you can see, I kind of struggled a bit first because every stroke that I set was just so muddy and it just didn't look right. So I really tried to find like, okay, what side is it on and how can I make this look better? And now I have found, oh, this looks much better. So what I did was basically take the base skin color, saturate it a bit more, darken it a bit more, but an important one, I think that makes a big difference as well, is hue shifting. Is basically shifting your color from your base skin color to a more reddish tone. So then your shadows have a warmer feel to it and feel slightly more natural and a bit less muddy. So of course this process, it's pretty quick. Shadow blocking is just putting in the spots or blocking in the spots where you see shadow on the face. And it doesn't matter if it's a bit messy now, because now as you can see, I'm gonna go in with the round brush to erase and basically shape the shadows to what I want it to look like. Another thing that I kind of forgot to mention is to be able to do this, you need relatively good color theory. And that's something that he didn't really mention that much. It's important to know your color theory. Of course, if you're using a reference, it's good if you can visually follow the reference and have the colors there, then it's already correct. But knowing your color theory will definitely enhance the ability or your drawing for sure. So here I'm going to paint in a bit of the highlights, kind of have more of the yellows on the side where the sun hits the face. There's also another thing that I wanted to mention is the way that he uses layers. He basically paints, if he paints something new, he creates a new layer and then merges it with the bottom layer. So eventually he starts painting on one single layer, pretty much. And that's something that's like super, how do you say it, scary to me as someone who uses hundreds of layers normally to paint every single part, so I would have like control over that or be able to erase it. The thing with that is if you have too many layers and you stop naming them, it becomes a mess to try to find them. Although now you can try to find your layers a bit better, but I think it's pretty cool to work on one layer. Here is when I'm gonna start to apply that smudge tool to distinguish the soft and hard edges, and now you really start to feel the form in the face, kind of the contrast between soft and hard shadows. And this was pretty new to me. I never really used the smudge tool before, and I think it's also very interesting instead of using the airbrush, because the airbrush, like Sam says, is completely soft, and that's something beginner artists do make. Me before as well, I used to use soft brushes all the time because I was scared to use hard edges and it would look weird. But honestly, it's better to use hard edges first and then soften the ones that need to be softened. Now I'm going to add a bit of that subsurface scattering. So basically our skin is like kind of like fleshy, and to really show that skin type of feel, you kind of add a saturated orange type of transition basically between the light and the shadow, and that creates a bit of that subsurface scattering feel to it. But make sure to not overdo it. Show it, but show it a bit subtly, like it's there. Yeah, in the reference it was a golden earring, but I went for silver instead because I like silver more. Here I adjusted the levels a bit slightly so I can have slightly more contrast. And now a bit for the highlights. Here I'm gonna add some bounce light, and this is something that Sam is pretty obsessed with, is this bounce light. And to explain this simply, it's basically the sky is being shot down onto the ground and back up onto the face. So kind of the bottom of the face on the shadow side, you'll kind of have a bit of that bluish tone to it, and that's what I added. So here's the final piece, and I hope you enjoyed the video.